I want to thank the CSCCa for having me and the organization run a great clinic that we're here to have. And Coach Ethan Rees, I think he was the one that triggered this possibility for me coming here. I believe I'm up. Yep, I'm up on there. So a little disclosure, I'm talking about triphasic training. I actually did write the book, so I'm not trying to sell it. I'm actually hack it here today, and hopefully you don't have to buy the book now if you don't have it. So there's my email. Please feel free to drop an email at the end of it. I believe you guys have these slides, but I realized I quickly had to review in case somebody didn't fully understand triphasic. And if you've read the book, I'm going to cover a lot of stuff in this beginning too that you may not realize that happened, because I didn't always mention it in the book. So where we're at is triphasic. I just decided to break down the muscle action: eccentric, isometric, concentric. And triphasic, the reason I think so many people use the concept, it's not a program. They can just slide our concept, the triphasic concept, into your current program. And it basically focuses on the foundation of an eccentric muscle contraction, the lengthening, and then the isometric phase is the next block, which we'll talk about. And then the big thing is that those two blocks support the concentric, okay? And what we're talking about here is making the stretch shortening cycle more effective. That's the most powerful thing we have, okay? Your athletes load up. Even a lineman coming out of a static position will stretch his muscles and then fire forward, okay? And if that doesn't happen fully, then the next step is a stretch shortening cycle. So every movement is dynamic. Now, I'm going to explain briefly my thinking, how I came across this, with the triphasic. And look, I didn't just come up with this. Like, I screwed so much stuff up that it was unbelievable before I figured it all out, okay? And I had to keep questioning myself, and I think some people are afraid of that a little bit. I pay people lots of money to tell me what I don't know. Okay, I invest lots of my own money in Skype interviews for experts across the world to tell me that I'm an idiot. Okay, and then I just make myself better from that. So I actually had to accept that I didn't know a whole lot and I'm an idiot before I can usually really start to get better and dig into stuff. Now, basically, here's what transpired. Was a graph that came up. It was two high-level shot putters, 65-footer and a 55-footer. Now, the 65-footer on a bench press, and these kids were the same bench press strength, about 440, okay? But one moved the weight much faster. And basically what transpired is the 65-footer is the blue guy on there. So he could bring the weight down faster and up faster, which made sense. Everyone said, well, he can move it up faster, that's it. The other kid that could only throw it 55 feet, 10 feet shorter, basically was the red line. So what transpired was, when I started testing kids many, many years ago, this is what I saw, right? So I'm like, how can I make the other guy faster? So we work on the concentric. It doesn't work that well, because he still couldn't bring the weight down super fast and hard and stop it. If you can't absorb that force, you can't reapply it. It's an end of story, done. So what transpired, I just started realizing that all the eccentric side of the graph, as you're staring at it on your left, you had to make them more and much stronger in the eccentric phase, and then the concentric phase got better. What happens is the two phases correlate. So if you make the eccentric better, what happens is the concentric gets better, because you can now handle the tissue can handle the force and reapply it. It's that simple. You see the benefits. What happens in the eccentric phase, and I'll assume everybody understands it, but you're going down slow. Here's the most advanced stuff. You're basically taking that eccentric phase, and the actin and myosin head in the muscle are getting torn apart because you're under tension. So people ask me, oh, can I do it at light loads? Well, you can do it for motor learning, but it doesn't work for the physiology base. So you are tearing the muscle apart. Yes, your heart rate variability goes up. You get inflammation response. White blood cells go through the roof because you're damaging that tissue. Sounds horrible. Maybe don't use that when you're talking to your administrators, okay? However, the immune system activates. And look, I can track all this. I have lots of testing equipment, okay? I track all this, And what transpires, immune system goes in, remodels that tissue. Now that tissue is more resilient. I built thicker, stronger tissue. So you're more resilient to stress, okay? That's the eccentric. We do eccentric workouts for 2 weeks. Depends what level you want to do. Some people implement just the main lift, the bench or squat that day, one lift, that's fine. I do every lift, every exercise eccentrically, okay? Yes, I have huge responses. Heart rate variability gets worse, inflammation goes through the roof. The one thing we do is we'll add tell them to eat collagen. Now we can give them protein if it's cleared. Collagen's like fairy dust at this point, okay? It is a huge response. If they can't get collagen, tell them to eat Jell-O, okay? Fried chicken, too, has a lot of it in, all right? Anything, chicken wings, just make sure you eat the stuff right off the bone, okay? Eat everything but the bone, right? So this helps in that phase for you to recover for the eccentric. So yes, if you start looking at eccentrics, and this is a whole nother talk, you can match up the triphasic phases. I have it matched with specific nutrition in each phase, okay? The next phase is the isometric phase. So I just told you the eccentrics remodeled the tissue. You have brand new tissue now. So you pull less hamstrings, you're less likely to get a soft tissue because you have new tissue. Now we have to make that tissue extremely strong. It's that simple. After I've made that new tissue, I spend 2 weeks getting that tissue extremely strong with my workouts. I always hold it in the weakest position so you get stronger in that position, okay? Same thing, I still recommend feeding them the collagen because now what you have to realize is you do eccentric. So let's say I do the same amount of reps in eccentric as I do in the isometric phase. So the eccentric phase, let's say I'm going down for a 4 count on bench, push back up hard. I always push up hard, okay? Always push up hard in every case, at least with athletes. Bodybuilders, maybe not. Now, eccentric down. I do 3 sets of 3 reps of 4 count down, and I do 3 sets of that. Well, if you do the same number of sets isometrically, the isometrics are about 30% metabolically harder, so it's a harder phase. So, but you've built them up, so they handle the eccentric, the hardest one. They may be more sore from eccentrics, but the isometric is more metabolically demanding, and it's a local response within that tissue with strength, but also vascularity, okay? So I'll get into some things where we talk about rate limiters, and one of the rate limiters in many athletes actually is the muscle being able to receive more blood, and this isometric phase actually affects that, okay? So your heart may be strong, your lungs may be strong, your vascular system may not be in the muscle at the capillaries, may not be as effective as it needs to be. It may be your rate limiter. What we found is this isometric phase takes care of that rate limiter, okay? So you're doing everything right with the heart, but at the other end, you got a problem. The isometric phase actually takes care of that, okay? So you can see how the system starts to build on it. Now with the isometric phase, it's harder and the heart rates go up higher. And I'll get more into the conditioning part of this as we go. And then the concentric phase, now that you've been able to eccentrically stop that muscle, a huge ability to stretch that tendon and then shoot that weight forward, that's the key. That's where the benefits comes. I saw it in track and field. How did I put this program together? We did it with track and field and swimming, and everybody got better. 85 to 90% lifetime PRs when they were supposed to hit their PRs. If you hit 30% lifetime PRs at a high level in college athletics, you're pretty good, okay? I don't hit that often now. I think the system's better. That was when I first implemented. But look, it's so simple. You can just take your current program and do eccentrics for 2 weeks. And here I put isometrics for the next 2, and then heavy concentrics the following. It doesn't have to be that way. Especially, I would recommend triphasic starting it in the off season. Okay, first time. I wouldn't do it in the in season the first time. You may hit it a little bit, but I hit it hard in the off season. You don't have to put it in that order. If you don't have that kind of time, you can put download periods in between. So my kids might do 1 week eccentrics. Hey, we're off this week because of break, and then we come back to the eccentric. And then we may go in ISO, and then maybe download. So it doesn't have to be in the order that I put it in. I just say, or at least the time frame. I say, get the eccentrics done, then the isos. However you have to structure your workouts. This is your call based upon you. Now, here's a 6-week example. But what happens is people have to realize you might not get your best results until 8 weeks out from week 0. Why? Because they're still overtrained. There's a little bit of overtraining. And then the qualities, and let's say you're training a vertical jump. Remember this? You've just hit heavy eccentrics. Your vertical jump may not go up because you haven't trained it enough. People have called me and say, hey, I must not have did it right, did Triphasic correctly because it's, my results weren't there. I'm like, well, wait 2 weeks and see what happens. And then they get better in 2 weeks. Full adaptations start to happen, okay? So, and just remember that. So you don't necessarily, people call me all the time, hey, with my track team, what am I doing? Well, hey, you want to do this about 6 weeks out from the season meet, end of the year meet. So then you end Triphasic 6 weeks out, and then you do your speed and power phases, okay? You don't want, same with whatever it is, from CrossFit to power lifters, they want to start Triphasic actually about 12 weeks out if you're doing it in a training cycle to start for peaking. And then you do your speed and power, which I'll talk more about later, okay? Now, I got through Triphasic, you don't have to buy the book. This is basically how I lay mine out. Let's say, for example, so my GPP block is the purple, the green, and the blue. Don't have to do it that way. And if you look, there's actually 20 weeks of 2 weeks blocks there. You don't have to do it that way. Is that ideal? That's probably ideal, but nobody lives in an ideal world. Here's actually a hack that I cut it down to 12 weeks, okay? And when I say that, when I say a hack, I got all those qualities that I had in this previous slide into basically, if you want, 10-week cycle. And I can't spend all day on this, but if you look at the slide up top, I did a YouTube video on my YouTube page that's the Triphasic Training Cycle Duration Hack. So it basically took the 20-week cycle, and you can work all the qualities of that 20-week cycle into a 10-week cycle by overlapping, okay? So I think that's one of the biggest frustrations is that if you don't have time, you can hack and you can condense this whole thing together. So basically, of the Triphasic training model from the GPP to the Triphasic to the speed and power peaking, I condensed it all down and did the same in 10 weeks as I did in 20. Do I get the results? Not always, but it just depends on your athlete, where they're at in their career. But now, so the next thing is how I get the best results that I've ever gotten. It's an advanced loading method. And here's one big thing. I call it super maximal loading. It's 120% loading. I use 120%, okay? Now, is it 120% of what? They're concentric max. But we know if I'm doing an eccentric, your eccentric may be as high as 160% of your concentric. So really, the 120 is really about 80 of your eccentric max. So it's not like it's 120% of your max ability to eccentrically load. So when I say this, my super maximal loading is done at 120% in the eccentric and isometric phases. Okay? Many people try to tell me I couldn't do it. I've done it for 8 years, thousands of athletes. I've shared it. Many people have given me positive feedback. I got high school coaches actually doing it, okay, with their advanced kids. I do it with kids that aren't advanced, that walk in and have never trained. After about 6 weeks, we get them there, and they can handle the load. It's by far, and here's the thing, it's a high-stress situation, right? Stress is what makes us better. If there's no stress, there's no adaptation. And let me show you exactly what happens during that time frame. So if I start week 0 at week 0, about resting heart rates with my athletes between 65 and 70, I go through the fitness levels of weeks 1 through 3. They drop about 10 to 15 beats. Weeks 4 and 5 is basically the eccentric phase. Their heartbeat drops lower. We're not doing any conditioning, especially in the weeks 4. We build a base in weeks 1 through 3, but no conditioning weeks 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And by the time we do the isometric supermaximal load, I have resting heart rates in my athletes who we don't condition between 32 and 38 resting heart rate. And I'll explain a little bit more why. During that, and I'll get into, but that isometric phase, why we see a 10-beat drop in 2 weeks in the resting heart rate is because I've talked about a little bit that vascular system. I follow stuff like pulse wave velocity. When I say pulse wave velocity, so if you have a super strong heart and that thing pumps, it's not a continuous pump. We know it's a contraction, right? If your vascular system is extremely pliable, okay, when that heart beats, a large lump of blood comes flushed out. So the hose is more pliable because the isometrics made it more pliable. And then what happens, that blood gets pushed. And it can be more blood with that push. So you got a more flexible hose. But on the back end, it's more flexible, but it also helps push the blood farther down. So my resting heart rates are this low because part of the rate limiter sometimes is that vascular system. And the pressure you're under those supermaximal isometrics is changing the structure of that vascular system. The pulse wave velocity is an indicator of basically the age of your arteries if you're an older person. There's formulas out there to predict your age on your arteries and the amount of flexibility and pliability they have. Well, I can make somebody younger on that formula. My athletes are younger on that formula. I improve that formula because I measure pulse wave velocity. Okay? Now, I'd be lying. I use RPR. I use breathing techniques, parasympathetic breathing. I breathe through the nose most of the time, causes a nitrous oxide release. So when my kids get out of squat rack, they're told to hit a solid nasal breath, and they breathe through their nose the whole time. If possible, unless they're conditioning super hard, and then they're allowed to breathe through their mouths, okay? But that releases nitrous oxide, obviously. You get vasodilation. So I'm just telling you all the things that help me develop this. And so on the slide, I think you guys can download this, but I put bioenergetics, how I integrate it. So all I'm going to say about my bioenergetics is that, look, when I'm in the weight room and I'm doing supermaximal loading, we do under 10-second sets. Okay? Everything's under 10 seconds. That day, everything we do, conditioning, speed development, all my other sets are under 10 seconds. Because the body starts to adapt to everything under 10 seconds. And most of our sports are done at high velocities under 10 seconds. So yes, when I can lift, I'm actually doing conditioning. I also put workout structure, how I structure it. So there's probably a couple hours of video on that slide alone if you click on the free YouTube links. Now, let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. I call it functional reserve range. I basically have two twins after I go through this supermaximal. And I'm going to get into the lifts that I use, but I do have, let's say I have two twins. Resting heart rate is 65, okay? His lactate threshold is 165. So his resting heart rate to his lactate threshold is 100 beats. That's how much stress he can basically handle in my eyes. Athlete, the other twin, has gotten his heart rate down to 32. And then his lactate threshold went up to, let's say, 172. He has 140 beats per minute. The difference between those two, if they go through the same workout, the bottom one, the twin that has that larger functional reserve, that workout, he may be recovered in hours because it wasn't as hard on him. The other one may take days to recover from the same workout. Okay? So, I'm telling you, with everything that happens, yes, there are changes in the heart with my supermaximal loading. There are changes in the vascular system. There are changes in the muscular system. Okay? Sometimes there's an occlusion problem, which within the muscular system on the back end as the heart's pumping it to the muscle. I think I've seen that disappear with the supermaximal loading. Okay? It's the sheer intensity of the workout. I'll give you this example. I have people visit me periodically, especially since I released a book, and I have an open door policy. Special operations personnel comes in, extremely trained, extremely high level. He couldn't handle and he's a tough person, he's at the highest levels, he couldn't handle the super maximal loading workout. He could only do 2 sets of what my women do in the summer. He could go all day, but when he got that intensity, that's what he couldn't handle. Okay? Now, the big thing is, when I say this, that athlete on the bottom is the one that I want to train. When I say that, because everyone talks about these chronic loads, but look, those chronic loads, I'm telling you, just don't apply to my athletes. Why? Because my athletes have a functional reserve that's big. We went 6 days, played 7 games, and did that back-to-back 3 weeks. Crazy amount of loads. 7 games in 6 days for 3 weeks in a row. I had half my guys showing slight signs of some heart rate variability issues. That was it, with no injuries. This is the beginning of our season. Chronic load said they should have all been in the hospital. But if your system trains you to handle stress, then what happens is those chronic loads don't apply. I'll just be honest with you. Okay? Now, I've had the same team, and look, there's so many variabilities in our stress management. I've had a team that decided the whole group just hated practice, didn't want to come to the arena anymore. Guess what? Their loads were down, and they were still getting overtrained. Okay? So the emotional part of this also, if a kid doesn't like his life, if a kid's upset about things, as a group, they're just not happy, they're not excited about being there, they may overtrain on less loads. There's no question. So that's the human part of this that we have to be aware of, that our coaches do a great job. So what I've seen, and when I talk about that, I'm going to talk about the safety bar single leg squat. That's what I use for super maximal loading. So basically, I'll just jump ahead. I'm basically doing a split squat, holding on to something, and doing a safety single leg bar squat. What I've seen, adaptations to the nervous system, and here's why I say nervous system. I have throwers, strong men, tested back squat, roughly right around 600-pound back squat. Didn't back squat, 6 weeks. Super maximal loading, single leg safety bar squat. Guess what happened? We got a 57-pound increase on their back squat without back squatting. Why? Because we just caused huge amounts of adaptation to happen and got super strong. And these were already strong men doing Olympic-style squats, okay? The cardiovascular system I've kind of talked about. We get that very specific adaptation. And when I say that, like, I want to reiterate, you'll see that I train eccentrically for 2 weeks, isometric. That block concept, you can train mixed. There's many mixed methods. But if you want to take your athletes to another level of a certain quality, you have to focus on that block. Because if you train isometrics one day and then eccentrics another day of the week and then speed another day a week, you can retain qualities, but you can't develop the athlete to another level. Okay? So these isometrics and the eccentric phases take that athlete to another level. And some other things I've had is, I've had a 132-pound female do 355 safety single leg bar squat. On that link, if you can get the video, there's one of my throwers doing a single leg safety bar squat with 800 pounds. Okay? Now you'll see when he does it, it's a pretty heavy load obviously, and I'll get into the coaching points, I'll save that for later. But the one thing is, you have to realize we're here to apply stress. So let me tell you a quick story, the untraining of an athlete, I call it. I put this on my YouTube channel. Had one of my females, as a matter of fact, the female that did the 355 safety bar single leg squat, she would now, left me after 4 years, had all this testing recorded from the national team. She turned around, did the national team testing, they got the final results, and then she jumped to we'll say a more functional based program, okay? So in her program, she basically took safety single leg bar squat at 355 and replaced them with 16-pound kettlebell swings. And I'm not saying functional training doesn't have a place, but with this athlete, what happened was all those results got worse after 3 months. Why? She was used to so much stress. I would track her heart rate variability. Look, you have to listen to me. If she does a workout and there's no parasympathetic response, you didn't have a workout. There was no stress. So when you go into the workout, you get a stressful response, sympathetic response. But then there needs to be a parasympathetic response to have a training effect. No tissues recovering. Your heart said there was no workout. I have no tissue to recover. So if you don't get a parasympathetic response in your workout, you haven't trained. So I'm watching these workouts, and we're watching her, and I'm watching the heart rate variability, and there was no workout, even though she did a workout. Okay? She untrained herself for 3 months, and that's what happened. That's why we're here. We have to stress people, and that's what so many people, I think, may be getting away from that aren't coaches. Hey, we have to stress these guys. Why the safety bar single leg squat? Look, this is the most carryover I've ever seen into sports. Now, look, we use super maximal methods. And actually, how do I figure out my max? Simple formula. I had multiple. My single leg safety bar max is 90% of their back squat. That's their max. That's it, right there. So if you want to start Monday, take their back squat max, times it by 90%, and now you have the single leg max. You'll be pretty close. If you want to be conservative, go 80. Okay? And we hold on, yes. Place hands on something. Why? Because we have 120% load. We're not worried about balance at this point. Okay? If you have a balance problem, fix your balance problem. It's not. This is about stress. We do DEXA scans. We have huge core muscles. Why? I don't do a lot of core, but this is one of the reasons. There's huge adaptation to hormones. Okay? Yes, I've been able to do blood work, fortunately. I've been able to do tracking with other methods. Hormones go through. You have 120%, your hormones go through the roof. Growth hormone. This is why we train to get a hormonal response. Or we could just do all kinds of volume like marathon runners, and we would get big and strong. It doesn't happen. They get a negative hormone response. Power athletes get a positive hormone response. Safety single leg bar squats gets the greatest response that I've seen. So super maximal, obviously it's very stressful. Look, when I say this, the reason we do it is, and I have video of it, if you can get that much stress and then you get your athlete out of there, and how we do this is we cluster it. So I do a 10-second hold. We'll do an eccentric, safety bar single leg squat. Athlete does his left leg. The other athlete jumps in and does his left leg while you're resting. Okay? And we got people spotting, and I'll cover that later. Then what happens, the athlete gets in and does his right leg for 10 seconds. The other athlete gets back in, partner, does the right leg. Athlete's resting, gets back in, does his left leg, right leg. And that's one set. We do 2 clusters on each leg, 10 seconds, intervals, okay, and cluster it out. And that's how you'll see it done in my weight room. Basically, the loading is the parameters right there, about between 120 and 100% on 110 and 120 on Monday. We usually do about 7 seconds, okay? And this is actually the only lift that I do it on. You could probably do it on other lifts, but I just do it on single leg safety bar squat. Everything else is just a typical triphasic. 7 seconds on Monday. Wednesdays, we do a normal concentric lift. It can be whatever you want. And then on Fridays, I go to about 100 to 110, okay? Or 105 to 110. And we do a longer duration, so a 10-second set. Then I often pair that with a French contrast. So they'll do their safety single leg bar squat, then they go do some hurdles, which I'll talk about later. And then in between there, while they're resting, they'll do maybe their prehab exercises. I do prehab exercises for rest. I don't do it at the beginning. Now what happens is, if you've been through this process, so for example, I had an elite level wrestler working with me. He was about 180, 85 at the end of that. And 30 seconds later, he was at 67 on his resting heart rate. So he went from 185 to 67. So his ability to manage stress was pretty good. One hack that I'll use is, so what I'll do is I'll use a safety bar, but we can also, instead of loading up all that weight and using spotters, we put weight releasers on. So you're bringing down extra load, the 120, and they fall off, and then there's less weight to bring up, okay? The other one that I came up with was the super maximum loading. Obviously, this can be done. I think you can. Oh, you can't see the video. Maybe I have to drag it. Is that right? That work? Oh, there it is. It's close. Can you see that? Yeah. Okay. Good. So you can do that with a hex bar. Have your partners pick it up, just let it down. So let me give you an example of how it looks. Okay, there it is, good. And that's the eccentric. Okay, so we make sure, what we do with that, we make sure we put the safety pins right at the bottom, so if they miss it, it's only about a 2 or 3 inch miss. Keep the chest neutral. You notice he actually started halfway through the position. It's okay. I only do the eccentrics through the bottom half. Why? You're in a stretch position. You get more effect out of it. So we do the bottom half. It's a better position to hold. So yes, we start the eccentrics right here, halfway through. You're just trying to get tons of muscle contraction and then tear the tissue apart, remember. Now, I teach my athletes to hold their breath, okay? Helps stabilize the spine. It actually probably causes blood pressure to go up higher, which then also affects the pulse wave velocity that we talked about, okay? The only rule is you're not allowed to pass out, but I haven't had anybody pass out, so. We actually have it do it on the front of their feet. So when they're doing it, their heel's off the ground. So when they go down, my heel's off the ground. They're squeezing with their big toe. Why? 34% of the force when you run comes out your foot and ankle. I'm trying to make that thing as strong as I possibly can. It's really effective if you do that, okay? Because you got super maximal loading on your back, you're coming down, and that big toe and that foot strengthens. If you can strengthen that ankle complex at the highest level, you're going to get some huge transfer in running and speed, okay? Which then, if you squeeze that toe a lot, it actually activates the glutes more, okay? Babinski reflex, if you want to, is kind of correlated with the big toe and your glutes firing, okay? Now, it's same thing with the ISO, kind of all the same concepts, same loading model. The ISO does get harder though, okay? Remember, we breathe in and we hold that at the bottom. So you're under there for 10 seconds on a Friday. And that's like the pain cave, right? It's cold, dark, and wet and lonely. Okay? It's tough. But what happens is you get greater adaptation. Why? It's just simple. We all know stress. Here's my loading model. It's pretty simple. I'll do 2 weeks of eccentrics. That loading, then I usually download in super maximal phase. Remember the first one I showed you was an eccentric phase right into an ISO? Well, at super maximal, I usually put a download in between. Okay? You have to, I think. And then I do isometrics for 2 weeks. And then the concentric phases just go to your normal loading. Okay? The concentric phase go to your normal loading, normal loads that I would use heavy. I think, so how it progresses, remember, I'll do the eccentric, and I'm doing it in a pretty much loaded position, normal, typical squat. Then when I go to my speed and power phase, I'll give you my 55 to 25% load. So this athlete, this is not my athlete, this is just a assistant of mine. You can see his knees go in front of his toes. Why? I'm trying to get his hips to go up and down because that's how you apply force to the ground. You may be leaning forward, accelerating, but your hips and knee drive straight to your ankle. The ankle helps you transfer that force in which direction, okay? So with that being said, let me hit that one more time. Notice his knees go in front of his toes. When he comes down, he goes straight up. You don't even have to use the other leg. That's just an example we were using in the video I found. On that slide, there's a whole lecture on how, in sports, my athletes' knees go in front of their toes the whole time. Every spot in sports. Every time in sports. So what you'll see is my athletes squat like this during the eccentric and heavy phases, and then to make it sport-specific, we squat knee over toe in this position, because this position is where they play their sport in, This position, I've never seen one of my athletes in this position, or your typical squat position. So this is why we put knee in front of the toe. It's important that you have a strong ankle to support that, and strong toes. Now, I think the biggest thing with super maximal loading and triphasic, and I'm going to say it, it's not sport specific. It's developed qualities that then transfer into sport specificity, okay? So by using this super maximal loading, you have to get to that 55 load. And the guy doing that video wasn't violent. My athletes are violent. They bring that bar down at 25% load super fast. The band's pulling down, and they violently shoot it up, okay? They are violent. And my point is that you have to get to speed. And when you see my training cycles, if you look right here, it always ends in speed. I default to speed. So let me, and again, you can get a video on hyperlinked on all this information. But my point with that is I always end in speed. So for example, a glute ham hyper done at slow, heavy loads or RDL is not sport specific. Let me tell you, I think this is my power phase of my hamstring. This is the most sport specific hamstring exercise I can do. It's just double banded on the rack. Now notice that's in my power phase. That was single leg. Single leg is actually slower than double. So I do my power phase on single leg in that exercise. So before in eccentric isometric phase, I'm doing RDLs, heavy stuff, glute ham hypers, whatever I want to do. This is the most sport specific hamstring exercise I got. And then the next one is my speed phase. This helps transfer all that strength and all that muscle you just built into something that works for sports. Now, I'm not going to go through all these videos because I may run out of time, but you can access this, to my understanding. This is the hip flexor, same thing, power phase. This transfers your hip flexor into sport specific. So then we got the double leg. So I go from moving slow, beating up tissue, to this. I won't go through the rest of these, but you can see, this is the most important part, because all this work you do has to transfer, and those exercises help you transfer. Helps with your hip extension, knee, because it's done at the speed at what sports is done. What in the weight room? So when I'm running, I have probably 400 or 500 pounds of force. When I'm running and this leg drives me forward, I have 300 to 400 pounds of force transferring my midsection in a split second. What exercise do we do in the weight room that mimics that? Not many. There's nothing. In a split second, 400 to 500 pounds of force get torqued, especially if you're really fast on it. It doesn't happen in the weight room. So we may need to rethink some of our weight room thoughts. But here's what I want everyone to understand with this, the whole triphasic concept, the process of training. So this, at the start of training, we have this, the process. You got the muscle and tendon. At the end of the process, our goal should be to make the muscle and tendon stronger. Okay? So what happens usually is the speed and the plyo workout make the tendon stronger. So will the isometric, so will other stuff. But that's what the focus on. Max strength makes the tissue stronger, the muscle. So with triphasic, you have the start of the training process here. The heavy eccentrics and isometrics train the muscle, and then you have to train power, speed to train the tendons, to get the whole complex. So what you have here basically is a power lifter that doesn't train the tendon, and when they do stuff, what do they hurt? They hurt their tendon. You have a guy that all he does is if he does speed and plyos, what's he pull? He pulls his hamstring. That's why. He hasn't trained the tissue. So remember, training's a process where most of this better be done. Okay? So when I say that process, and with that being said, the process is key. So one of the most effective things I wrote about in Triphasic was the French contrast. But in my opinion, I'm always trying to make things better. I just improved the quality of French contrast, and essentially it's hypertrophy fast twitch fiber selection. That's what French contrast is. I just made that fast twitch fiber selection and the hypertrophy of it more effective. It's called potentiation clusters. If you download this, you can get an article. Let me back up. French contrast is essentially 2 to 4 reps, whether you do an isometric, eccentric, or concentrics of a single leg squat. Then you do 4 hurdle hops or whatever plyos you want. Then you go back to a loaded squat jump for 4 reps, and then you can do another hurdle hop or some other plyometrics. So really you got 16 reps. Basically, how do I make that better? I do, instead of 16 reps, doing it sets of 4, I'll do singles of everything. So let me explain that. Basically, how I would offset that is, I'll just go back to this slide. I do 1 rep of the safety single leg bar squat, or the safety single leg squat. And then I do 1 rep of the hurdle hop. I do 1 rep of the loaded squat jump. I'll do 1 rep of this, and then I go right back. And I do 1 more rep, 1 more rep, 1 more rep, 1 rep. And then I do that 2 more times. So I did 16 singles instead of 4 sets, or 4 set of 4 reps. Guess what? The quality gets higher. In season, I'll do that. Maybe it's only 3 times through. What did I do? I increased the quality. I just increased the quality. The body learns from quality. This is it. Very specific stress at high quality. And basically, I just wrote down some examples of how you can do it. And you don't even have to do French contrast. You can just do single rep squat with a box jump. So actually, if you're a football coach with a heavy lineman, he may do 1 rep at back squat, then go over to the box jump, do that, go right back to box or back squat at lighter loads, and then 1 rep. He'll do this. He'll go through 4 and 4, or single, 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 back and forth for 8 total reps, and then do his prehab in between during that time. And I've listed a few different examples of it. You can make up any potentiation cluster, but I'm telling you, this just increases the quality of what you do. In French contrast, I get emails all the time between this and French contrast about how much faster it made their athletes. And look, that transfer. So I can do French contrast whether I'm super maximal, whether I'm doing speed. But during the season, I'll do a 35 to 40% loaded squat jump with drop box jumps, then accelerated bands, and I go right over and do that again, and I'll cycle through that 3 or 4 times. The big thing is that you have to realize that quality of the fast twitch fibers being recruited at high levels, and that's what you're hoping that they tap into in the sport. Now, that's potentiation clusters. That's some of the best stuff that I've got. I haven't put that in a book or anything. The next thing I have is lactate retention method, which you have to realize, lactate retention you realize that you might not get the training results right away, but you get adaptation. There's times where I prefer adaptation over results. So in the beginning of a cycle, okay, I want results or adaptation so that then later I get results. And let me explain that. So I basically have my athletes do a lactate set. And in my situation, moving along here, let me tell you what it is. So my girls will run up my stadium steps. It takes about 39 for the men, 45 for the female to complete my course. They get huge lactate build up. And a lot of people want to walk it out, right? I actually want that adaptation to stay in. So what you see there is my girls run up the steps and squat on the wall for 45 seconds to hold that lactate in. Why do I want it out if that's what we're trying to adapt to? So we hold it in there, okay? This, and then they stand up and then they walk it out and go to the next rep. They'll wait about 1.5 to 2 minutes sometimes, whatever your intervals are, but they hold that lactate in there. Now that's for conditioning, right? You can do it whatever. You can do running, you can do it after shuttles, you can do it after bike sprints. If you're running 300s, as soon as they're done, get against the wall or somewhere, squat down and hold that lactate in there, and the muscle will keep adapting. I just gave you some scenarios, but what we have is, this is the heart rate monitor. This is my kids running. They stop for 40 seconds, heart rate drops, and then what happens? That little blump is when they stood up. That's the substrates coming out of the muscle. Okay? There it is. There's the adaptation that's being held in. And this was just basically 4 reps or 5. Now, keep in mind, I think, obviously it's from my friend Hank there. Again, if you're in a track coach, you don't want to do this right before the track season or the event. You want to do this weeks out during your adoption phase, first 3 to 4 weeks, and then you pull it and do it later, and then just do your normal running later. But this is where I prefer adaptation over performance. Now, when else do you apply it? So I do a lot of super maximal loading, but this spring, when I say that, under 10 seconds. But now, any sets I do over with my legs, let's say I back squat for a set of 24 seconds. So I do 5 eccentric, maybe it's a 5-second count, so it's 25 seconds. As soon as they're done, they get down and they squat because I'm trying to hold that lactate in there longer to get them to adapt, okay? That's my point. So you can do it in the weight room whenever they do a set with their legs over 20, or really over 15 seconds. You squat them down, let them set there for 30 to 40 seconds, holding their legs tight. And then you just do what you normally do, okay? You'll get greater adaptations, greater size if that's what you want. Actually, I feel females adapt to this better than males, okay? Females adapt to this better than males. And again, you would want to pull this 4 to 6 weeks before you actually need to perform, okay? Again, my biggest thing is everything I do is for a process. If you click all those videos that I sent, you can definitely see there's a process. Doesn't mean that that's the only process or the only way. That's just how I do it, but I do it differently all the time because scenarios and schedules with kids and our academics are obviously change all the time. So those are my super maximal methods. Those are methods that I use or super effective that I get the best results I can. When I say that, between that, super maximal concepts, I had one year where we had 5,000 practices with 1 soft tissue miss in hockey, and that was it. So 5,000 practices, every day we had 23 practices, there was 5,000 roughly, we had 1 soft tissue miss. Okay, and that was it. Now I couldn't do anything about broken bones and a puck coming at you and hitting you in the hand at 90 miles an hour. So, but I think you understand, I apply stress, I find new ways to apply stress, and the super maximal is the most effective way. Then I have metabolic stress and tissue adaptation. I think between the lactate retention method and the super maximal loading, those tissue methods are extremely effective for you to make sure that you build up the tissue so you don't get blamed for problems in what the kids have. I know we receive the blunt of injuries, but it may not be us. It may be the coaches pushing them too hard or doing bad drills, in my opinion. But we gotta get these kids beyond that, and this is a very effective way. So I don't know if there's any questions. If we have, yes.
Talking about the super maximal loading, you went through the 6-bar split squat. You talked about having one guy go in, do a rep, the other guy go in. Do you have a set rest period that you'll have, or is it just while that guy's going?
Yeah, during that cluster time, he asked, do I have a set rest period? I do not. One guy's going 10 seconds, and then, because actually it ends up being probably 30 to 40 seconds or 50 total, or even a minute more, because you do your left leg, and then the other kid does his left, then you go back, you do your right, and so that's been about probably 25 seconds, right? So you don't get back to your left leg for another minute total, maybe a little bit more. So yeah, and then as soon as we're done, like I said, we probably go over the French contrast, because nervous system's heightened. The stiffness qualities of them jumping through hurdles and their explosiveness goes through the roof, to be honest with you, okay? Physiology-wise, I don't do a lot of conditioning because I feel that the super maximal loading just causes all those adaptations, more than just the lungs and the heart, right? To me, there's like 4 rate limiters that you have. You got your heart, you got your lungs, you got the vascular system, and your muscular system. The only one Triphasic doesn't do itself is probably the lungs. Okay, so if you have a lung problem, then Then you're going to have to work on their breathing, which you can probably see. So then, the big thing is that the hardest one for me to fix was the heart, because I got a lot of kids with a left ventricle problem of ejection fracture. And what happens is the left ventricle is super strong, and the blood starts to pool in the backside of the heart. So the supramaximal loading seems to fix that, especially after the isometric phase. Okay? And that's basically because these kids do a lot of interval training. The wall of the heart gets too thick, and the chamber becomes smaller than it should be. So then we fix that by making that chamber bigger with the whole training system, not just the isometric phase. And these are all just things I find, and my machines tell me that are broken, and my kids are not correct or could be better. And then we find that they're able to get fixed. So, any other questions? Okay, thank you for your time. Hopefully I gave you ideas. Look, you can make this system better. This is just, my assistants are out there that are making it better. My assistants here give me ideas. I think Corey and Cam are here. They've given me great ideas. So look, you can make this better. I just ask if you do, just drop me an email and let me know how you made it better, so I can use it. Because I'm just here to win, that's all. So, well, thank you for your time.